Korea's #1 salesman. Calling himself that at the Davos Forum, President Yoon told the global CEOs that the Korean market and his office are open 24/7. Yoon is set to make his official debut at the forum with an address focusing on solidarity and cooperation later today. After months of fighting inflation, it seems the Federal Reserve's aggressive tightening policy may be starting to have an impact. Retail sales and producer prices in December are down by more than forecast by analysts. A helicopter crash in Ukraine has left at least 14 people dead, including the country's interior minister. Meanwhile, the NATO chief has called for a significant boost in arms for the war-plagued country. President Yoon has just wrapped up his second day in Switzerland, but is first in the alpine town of Davos. All day long, the South Korean leader doubled as the nation's top diplomat and salesman, encouraging chiefs of global firms to invest in his country. Our top office bureau chief Moon Gun-young leads us off this morning.
President Yoon greets Pat Gelsinger of Intel with a firm handshake.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure, and we so appreciate our business in Korea for decades.
From CEOs of global tech giants Arvind Krishna of IBM, Cristiano Amon of Qualcomm, and Pat Gelsinger of Intel, to big names from the financial sector, Steven Schwartzman of Blackstone, Jamie Dimon of JP Morgan, and Khaldun Al-Mubarak of Mubadala Investment. 15 chiefs of global companies and heads of 6 major Korean firms gathered at the Swiss alpine town of Davos for lunch with the South Korean president. Mr. Yoon pitched himself as South Korea's #1 salesman and promoted his country as an attractive investment destination, asking the global CEOs to let him know if they run into any systems in Korea that do not meet global standards. Mr. President said he was willing to make adjustments to the system to better accommodate foreign investment.
여기 한국 시장도 열려 있고 제 사무실도 열려 있으니 언제든지 찾아주시기를 부탁드리겠습니다.
South Korea also welcomed a solid investment decision in Davos. Danish wind turbine producer Vestas Wind Systems pledged to invest $300 million in Korea and to relocate its Asia-Pacific headquarters to the country, a decision which Seoul's top office says is a clear show of global companies' recognition of South Korea as an investment hub. Vestas is the world's #1 producer of wind turbines. Later in the evening, President Yoon attended the Korea Night 2023 event on the sidelines of the World Economic Forum.
한국 정부는 민간 기업과 함께 인류 공동의 문제 해결을 위한 국제적 노력에 적극 참여하고 책임 있는 역할을 다하고자 합니다.
Where he rallied support for his country's bid to host the 2030 World Expo in the southeastern port city of Busan as it's part of the nation's such efforts. On Thursday, day 3 of his 4-day Swiss tour, the South Korean leader will address the annual meeting of the World Economic Forum, the first South Korean president to do so in 9 years, where he'll propose international cooperation and solidarity for global supply chain resilience and transition to clean energy. Moon Gun-young, Arirang News.
The European Union is looking to push for a new law aimed at boosting the region's green industries to counter similar efforts by the U.S. under its Inflation Reduction Act. The president of the European Commission, Ursula von der Leyen, officially proposed to EU members on Wednesday what's been dubbed the Net Zero Industry Act. The act is aimed at making the region the global clean tech market leader by rapidly expanding related industries through looser regulations for state funding. The announcement comes a day after von der Leyen first proposed the idea at the World Economic Forum in Davos. After months of fighting inflation, it seems the Federal Reserve's aggressive tightening policy may be starting to have an impact. Retail sales and producer prices in December are down by more than what analysts predicted. Our Oh Soo-young has more.
Is the American economy losing steam? Retail sales in December fell by 1.1% on month in the United States, marking the biggest drop in a year and the second straight month of decline. That's according to the Commerce Department's figures released Wednesday. Rising interest rates, coupled with high inflation and worries about a slowing economy, appear to have taken their toll on retail spending in almost every category, despite the Black Friday shopping holiday and the year-end seasonal festivities. Analysts say the colder weather in December is also likely to have hit restaurant sales. Production also took a hit, with manufacturing output falling by the most in nearly 2 years in December. Meanwhile, producer prices fell by 0.5%, more than what economists predicted. The decline in producer prices is attributed to lower costs of food and energy. This suggests the Federal Reserve's tightening monetary policy is finally helping dampen the persistently high inflation in the country. It is unclear whether the Fed will now soften its policy as inflation shows signs of abating. Analysts say it could slow down the pace of its rate hikes to cushion the blow on American households. As the December figures were announced, Wall Street sank on Wednesday, with the S&P 500 and Dow Jones Industrial Average recording their largest daily drops in 5 weeks. The S&P fell by 1.56%, the Dow by 1.81%, and the Nasdaq Composite also took a tumble of 1.24%, its first loss in 8 sessions. Oh Soo-young, Arirang News.
Tomorrow, on January 20th, South Korea enters the 4th year of the COVID-19 era. A roller coaster 3 years on from the first case being announced here, we're seemingly a step closer to the removal of indoor mask mandates. We'll look back at the past 3 years and also the next 3 years to come with Professor Howard from Seoul National University. Welcome to the program.
Good morning.
Good morning. So let's start with the first question. Professor, we've come a long way, let's be real. Tight border restrictions, mandatory QR check-ins, and also easing of the outdoor mask mandate, much more. How would you evaluate the past 3 years? I mean, what has Korea done well to fight the pandemic?
I can't believe that it has been only 3 years. Thank God. We've managed the pandemic one way or another to come to this point. I would give a good grade to the Korean government for the first year in implementing very tight and exhaustive quarantine measures, which are summarized by 3 T's. In other words, testing, trace, and treatment. This strategy worked out well, although it was very labor-intensive and resource-demanding. It was only achievable since South Korea made advanced diagnostics tests, such as PCR, available nationwide as fast and widespread as possible. Drive-through testing was also something commendable. However, the second year was plagued by several mistakes and untimely decision-makings. The government failed to secure vaccines as early and ample as possible. It was not only delayed by almost 3 months, but the processes were not as smooth as they should be. It was bumpy and not well organized. In addition, the government hastened to lift all the quarantine bans too early, particularly toward the end of the second year and the early third year. This was not a wise or scientific decision, I think, given the Omicron variant started getting rampant the same period. The third year, where we are in, has been mixed. The quarantine leadership changed, but they did not seem to operate efficiently as they had boasted before. But making antiviral agents available as early as possible was something that I want to praise for.
Right. It's really hard to sum up the past 3 years in just 1 minute. Thank you. And also, according to a latest data, South Korea ranks the 7th in the world in terms of the total number of cases and also the 34th when it comes to the number of deaths. I mean, these figures are, I personally believe, are concerning considering the South Korea's tiny population. I mean, how would you evaluate the COVID situation in the country at the moment and also in the near future?
the statistics is both alarming and reassuring. As you have just said, the cumulative confirmed cases per population in South Korea is almost top in the world, nearly doubling that in the United States. However, when it comes to death caused by COVID-19, we have a totally different picture. South Korea has done well in the arena, leading to a very low case fatality rate, which has been maintained at or below 0.1%, which is very, very low. The Omicron subvariant features are something that we need to watch closely. The BA.5 has handed over the leading subvariant position to BA 2.75, and BQ.1 is also increasing, partly reflecting the fact that more people are started to travel abroad now. These two subvariants are known to be more immune evasive than BA.5, but the symptoms are similar or even milder. All in all, the situation in Korea right now looks not too bad, with the daily new cases decreasing too.
Right. And also, we cannot not talk about masks. Tomorrow, finally, the country's health authorities are set to announce details on the lifting of the indoor mask mandate. I'm sure it's something that all of us have very looked forward to, but there are also voices of concerns over the move.
Sure.
What do you think in South Korea in particular needs to be extra mindful of after the restriction is lifted?
Well, I'm one of those who have looked forward to having the indoor mask mandate lifted. The government said 3 out of 4 conditions were met for the lifting, and I agree. Of course, there are people who have concerns of this move, but I want to humbly point out that the indoor mask mandate has not been as effective as it was or it had to be. If I'm not seriously mistaken, South Korea is the only advanced country in the world that still requires wearing indoor masks. I'm joining today's program from my U.S. home in Maryland today, and I have now seen many people wearing a face mask, although there are some who might have health concerns, so wear masks indoors. However, this is a self-directed and voluntary decision an individual can make. That being said, I suspect many in South Korea will still wear a face mask indoors, even after the mandate will have been lifted. It is a cautious approach to wear masks in crowded settings such as public transportation and in spaces populated with vulnerable subjects such as hospitals and nursing homes. Additionally, don't delay getting a booster shot, particularly if you are old, 60 years and beyond, or at risk for several diseases because you have underlying conditions.
Sure, certainly after living with masks for the past 3 years, it's almost bittersweet to say goodbye to masks.
Sure.
All right, thank you so much for joining us all the way from Maryland this morning.
Thank you, and you have a good one.
A deadly helicopter crash in Ukraine on Wednesday has killed at least 14 people, including the country's interior minister. Meanwhile, NATO has called for a significant boost in the supply of arms to Ukraine. Our Lee Seung-jae has more.
At least 14 people were reportedly killed, including one child, when a helicopter crashed in the eastern suburb of the capital Kyiv on Wednesday. Also among the dead were a number of high-level officials, including Interior Minister Denis Monastyrsky and his first deputy minister and the state secretary. And while at this time reports are calling the crash an accident, authorities say it was following several possible causes, including sabotage, a technical malfunction, or a breach of flight rules. The Interior Minister was one of President Volodymyr Zelensky's longest-serving political advisors. His death also marks a significant loss for the Ukrainian government as he led the vital task of maintaining security and running the police during the war. The head of Ukraine's National Police Force has been appointed acting Interior Minister following his death. Meanwhile, over at the Davos Forum, NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg said Wednesday that Ukraine needs more weapons at what is a pivotal moment in Russia's invasion. He added that such support is the only way to a negotiated peaceful solution. Stoltenberg went on to say Ukraine needs more air defense systems and armor, and also ammunition, spare parts, and maintenance capabilities to ensure that its existing weapons continue to function during the prolonged war. The comments come as defense leaders from around 50 countries and NATO will hold talks at Germany's Ramstein air base on Friday to discuss the ongoing invasion of Ukraine. Lee Seung-jae, Arirang News.
North Korea has adopted the so-called Pyongyang Cultural Language Protection Act to regulate the use of foreign languages, including dialects used in South Korea in the regime. The measure was adopted in an effort to tighten controls of overseas content and media into the north. Also coming out of its key parliamentary meeting carried out on Tuesday and Wednesday was the regime's 2023 budget plan, which is up 1.7% compared to the previous year. And defense spending remains the same as last year at 15.9%. Leader Kim Jong-un was not present at the annual meeting, nor was there a message for either Seoul or Washington. South Korea's ambassador to Japan has called on Japanese companies to take part in compensating the Korean victims of Japan's wartime forced labor. The victims continue to criticize Seoul's recent proposal to resolve the issue through a third party. Our foreign affairs correspondent Bae Eun-ji reports.
About a week after the South Korean government proposed compensating the Korean victims of Japan's wartime forced labor through a public foundation, South Korea's ambassador to Japan, Yoon urged the accused Japanese firms to participate in creating the fund. Speaking Wednesday to the Japanese news outlet Mainichi, he stressed that the victims are hoping for a sincere apology from the Japanese firms. He added that although South Korea cannot force those companies to apologize, voluntarily contributing to the public foundation is one way to resolve this issue. The ambassador also called for the resumption of what's known as shuttle diplomacy, in which the leaders regularly visit each other's country, a practice that has been stalled since 2011. But the government's recent proposal for public funds to compensate the forced labor victims provoked strong opposition. The victims and civic groups supporting them said this issue cannot be resolved without sincere apologies and participation from the Japanese companies. Members of civic groups gathered in front of Seoul's foreign ministry on Wednesday to protest against the plan, calling it humiliating.
The government needs to immediately get rid of their humiliating resolution on the forced labor issue and go back to where they started. This proposal does not include a sincere apology from Japan.
In a public hearing at the National Assembly last Thursday, the Foreign Ministry said it's reviewing plans to compensate the victims through a domestic fund instead of the assets of the accused Japanese firms. In landmark rulings in 2018, South Korea's Supreme Court ordered two Japanese companies, Mitsubishi Heavy Industries and Nippon Steel, to compensate the Koreans they subjected to forced labor. But so far, the companies have ignored those orders. Bae Eun-ji, Arirang News.
South Korea's opposition parties are still searching for answers in the Itaewon crowd crush. They demand a launching an independent investigative body and urge dismissal of the nation's interior minister. Our National Assembly correspondent Han Sung-woo reports.
South Korea's opposition parties have called for the establishment of an independent investigative body through a new special law to determine who should be held responsible for the Itaewon Halloween crowd crush and prevent such an incident from ever happening again. Opposition lawmakers gathered at the National Assembly on Wednesday for a press briefing, just a day after unilaterally adopting a final report on the parliamentary probe into the tragedy, and once again called for Interior Minister Lee Sang-min to be held responsible and dismissed.
The police didn't summon Minister Lee Sang-min, nor did they conduct a single search and seizure. He's preserved his post, absolved of any responsibility. We will hold him strictly accountable.
The ruling People Power Party have defended Lee against the opposition's allegations of dereliction of duty and professional negligence, accusing the Democratic Party of Korea of using the parliamentary probe that ended on Tuesday to remove the minister from his post.
Since day one, the opposition has had no interest in uncovering the truth or establishing prevention guidelines. They've essentially acknowledged that their goal was to prolong a political dispute by setting a trap for Minister Lee Sang-min to get him charged with perjury.
Besides an independent investigative body and Minister Lee's dismissal, the opposition are also demanding a special counsel probe, an apology from President Yoon Suk-yeol, the launching of a special parliamentary committee on disaster safety, and an official memorial service for those who died.
One more thing. I ask both the ruling party and its main opposition, when enacting the special law for an independent body, not to fight like little children. Be faithful to your duties as legislators. Stand up for us, the bereaved families, and the people.
한성우, Arirang News.
For a look at the news from around the world, we now turn to our Matthew Ashley joining us here in the studio. Good morning, Matthew.
Good morning, Dami.
All right, let's start in the Philippines, where a prominent journalist, as well as a Nobel Peace Prize laureate Maria Ressa, has been acquitted of tax evasion charges.
Well, that's right. Ressa and her online news outlet Rappler were acquitted after the Court of Tax Appeals ruled on Wednesday of evading tax payments. Now, it comes 4 years after charges were laid by the former Rodrigo Duterte government, which accused Ressa and her news outlet of not paying taxes after raising capital through foreign investor partnerships. Now, the charges were seen as an attempt to muzzle Ressa's critical reporting, with advocacy group Human Rights Watch calling them bogus and politically motivated. But more legal battles lie ahead for the 59-year-old. She faces a Supreme Court appeal for a libel conviction, which carries a 6-year sentence if upheld. This on top of a separate tax case in another court, as well as an appeal by Rappler against an order to close by the Securities and Exchange Commission. Now, moving on now to the tech sector, as Microsoft is set to lay off 10,000 employees. That comes just under 5% of its global workforce. The company said in a securities filing on Wednesday that the move is in response to economic uncertainties. It expects to complete the layoffs by the end of March, the end of the company's third fiscal quarter. Meanwhile, social media company Twitter has started auctioning off surplus office items. This includes its Bluebird Twitter statue, which was sold for $100,000 on Wednesday. The auction follows reports that Twitter is struggling to meet some of its financial obligations, such as office rent. Now, Greenland is experiencing its warmest temperatures in at least 1,000 years. This is according to a report published in the journal Nature on Wednesday. It detailed that from 2001 and 2011, the country, on average, was 1.5 degrees Celsius warmer than in previous years. Now, the finding was made after scientists spent years looking at Greenland's ice sheets and analyzing ancient ice cores. The increased temperatures have been blamed on climate change related to human activity. The discovery is significant, as the island currently is the biggest contributor to rising sea levels. It's expected that if carbon emissions continue at the present rate, Greenland will add up to 50 centimeters to global sea levels by the year 2100. And finally, the world's oldest person has died at the age of 118. Sister Andre, a French nun living in a nursing home in the port city of Toulon, passed away Tuesday local time. Born Lucille Randon in the town of Alès in February 1904, she later took her religious name after joining the convent. The nun had lived through 2 world wars and even survived catching COVID-19 without realizing she was sick. Sister Andre became the oldest living person last year after the death of Japan's 119-year-old Kane Tanaka. Now, the world's oldest person is Maria Brañas Morera, an American-born 115-year-old.
Good morning. It's a colder start to the day. Feels like temperatures in the capital are as low as -10 degrees Celsius. But the cold will rapidly ease by the afternoon, reaching up to 5 degrees Celsius. But dust levels will be high in the capital, Chungcheongdo and Jeollabuk-do and Gyeongsang-do provinces. And daily highs will be 1 to 3 degrees higher today. Jeju will be quite windy all day today. The central regions will see more wet clouds moving in tonight with a mix of rain and snow in the forecast. Gangwon province could see up to 5 centimeters, while the rest of the country will see 1 to 3 centimeters of snowfall. Then the blast of freezing air moves into the country, putting the nation in an icy grip through the Seollal holiday weekend. And next week looks to be the coldest of the season, with morning lows going down below -15 degrees Celsius here in the capital. With that, here's a look at the weather conditions around the globe.
That wraps up today's New Day at Arirang, but do stay with us for more updates throughout the day. Thanks for watching.